Hey guys, it's Alexandra. Today I'm going to be talking with Kurt, who's going to be giving the male perspective on body image issues and beauty standards and fat phobia. So I know it might be an uncomfortable conversation, but I think it's an important one. So I hope that you will stay tuned and subscribe for more videos. All right, thank you. So I came across your TikTok page and it was really interesting for me. What caught my eye, the video that I happened to come across was one about you talking about Dunkin' Donuts and your experience there with a woman who commented on your body.
The rudest thing somebody's ever said to my face was I was getting a nice coffee and a bagel at a Dunkin' Donuts, and a very thin white woman came up to me while I was waiting for my food, and she goes, "Do you really think you need that food? I'm just saying. I'm concerned about your health." Bitch, I do not know you. I do not care about you. I literally stood right in front of her. I said, "Why did you say that?" She was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "Why did you say that?" I started to raise my voice. "Why did you say that? Why did you say that? Why did you say that? Why are you harassing me? Why are you bothering me?" She yells, "I'm being attacked by me." I haven't laid a single hand on her. And I said, "Well, maybe this will teach you from trying to humiliate strangers in public, because I am not going to sit here and be insulted by you."
And I think something for me that's really interesting is that I see a lot on TikTok about women and women in their bodies and body shaming women and body positivity for women mainly. So it's very interesting to see the experience of a man going through that. I don't think that's really talked about enough. I think it probably happens a lot and isn't talked about. So I'd love to hear about your experiences with fat shaming and sort of your concept of what fat phobia is and what it means for people.
Sure. Excuse me. Sure. I think that a lot of the time when we talk about fat phobia, and I think the reason that men are not, how do I put this in a polite kind of way? The reason the men are not often discussed with the same regularity and consistency that women are is because men generally do not experience the same level of fat phobia that women do. I think that certainly traditionally women experience much more oppression and difficulties regarding fat phobia than men did. And I think that's kind of part of why, and it was, the movement was started by women of color for marginalized bodies. So I think, and kind of men got away with not really having to, the beauty standards for men were quite, loosey-goosey, for lack of a better term. I mean, one of the best examples I like to say is, like, if you look at old Hollywood and like the representations of like Tarzan, for example, this very traditionally masculine, virile character, you saw men who didn't have six packs, who didn't have very well-defined muscles playing that role. Even look at like Adam West's Batman compared to what we look at for our Batman character now. Only in the latter half of the 20th century do I think we really see an expansion, not expansion, but a restatement of the beauty standards for men. Especially, it's really the rise of social media has affected us all, because it sets these standards so incredibly high, because we see these people who genetically have a disposition to looking a certain way and thinking that that's normal when it's really the exception. And I think that's men and women as well. But I think that because men were not held to such as high a standard as women were and still are, that's why I think we kind of entered the movement a little bit later, if that makes sense.
Right. So what are some experiences personally that you've had with feeling oppressed because of your body?
Well, the story that I told on TikTok is one of many stories of having that happen. It is very common, and I'm sure people will back me up on this, to have thin or mid-sized people feel that they are within their rights to comment on your body and what you were eating. I think for fat people, and this is all fat people, not just men, I think that people feel entitled to the right to kind of, do you really need that piece of cake? You know, to really loudly and openly police what fat people eat. And I think that that is such a common and kind of almost normalized microaggression that I think people don't like. I had people on that video being like, well, she was just caring about your health. But that's the thing with fat shaming that I and oppression for fat people that's so kind of vile and disgusting, is that people cloak it in this like, we're just here for your health, which of course they're not. They're there to harass you. They're there to make your life worse for 20 minutes, as all bullying is. So I think that is a kind of, coming to that discovery was a huge, to realize nobody really cares. I mean, not that nobody cares, but nobody who phrases it like that actually cares.
Right.
And I think that it's a lot of it's entitlement from thin people and mid-sized people. The entitlement of you have to prove that you're healthy if you say you're healthy. You have to the having to defend existing is so frustrating. And I think any marginalized group can, as a queer person myself, I certainly can advocate for that in that space. But I think that groups that have legal protections, have a little bit of a more justified, like a more real world justified protection and a justified reason to fight back. And there is no legal ramification for someone discriminating against somebody for sizeism, whether they, if they decide not to hire someone because they're fat or they're thin. Even if those discrimination laws are like not always effective, which I'm sure, people would agree with me about. But because we don't even have that, then people can sit here and be like, well, there's not even a law. You're not oppressed. You're not discriminated against. There's no law. I think that people use that as like a workaround. It's funny because I worked at Dunkin' Donuts. That was my first job, and loyal customer. But that was, but anytime, I don't have so much of a problem with it now. But when I was younger, eating in public was a huge problem, which is disordered eating to a certain extent. I had issues with it around certain people rather than just around people in general. But it all kind of stems from people feeling that they have the right to make comments, judge, and just kind of analyze what a fat person is doing in public. That's kind of what I discovered, is that you were always being watched by somebody. And that leads to like anxiety, which leads to mental health issues. So I think that's the biggest part of it that I've learned, is because like as being raised as a cisgender man, you don't always feel like people are looking at you because you are the norm. So it was a huge shift and at that point I was, when I developed this mentality, I hadn't kind of come into my own as a queer person yet. So as far as I knew, nobody was looking at me. It's nobody's business. That was the first. So discovering that fat people are always being watched was one of the first times I realized that because I deviated from this norm of thin white cisgender gay man, or a thin white cisgender straight man, I was going to be watched. People were going to look at me. And then you add in the gay stuff. So yeah, that's kind of I don't know. I went on a tangent, but I hope I answered your question.
Do you ever feel like you brought up health, and I do notice a lot of commentary when people post, when specifically plus size people post something, and the comments are always like, well, we say this because we're looking out for your health, or what about your other, this is clearly not healthy. Anyone who thinks this is healthy is whatever, blind, or whoever, whatever the mean comments are. And I'm wondering, do you feel like that should even matter? The health of
No,
somebody?
I mean, that's the thing, is it's about dignity. It's about respect. It's about treating people like people. Because regardless if someone is, you wouldn't say that to a cancer patient who's sick. So people need to make a decision. Is obesity a disease? Then you need to treat it like a disease. And you know, if someone genuinely believes that obesity is a disease, then you need to treat it like a disease and not shame people for being sick. You would never be like, oh wow, you got cancer. You know, it's like, it doesn't make any sense. On the other side, if you're going to say, well, it's your fault that you are fat, then you need to be willing to go, oh, well, if you explain to me like, oh, this, then you have to be able to sit there and be like, take the science. If someone explains the science to you behind it, you have to go, oh, well, I guess it's not yours. Like, you have to pick a side. Like, that's the problem. And I have and this is a person, this is a personal frustration, which I don't know if people will agree with me, but one of the things that makes me so upset, especially on the internet, it makes me so angry, is when people expect fat people to like give their medical history, to like justify. Why should we have to justify jack shit? You know what I mean? It's so dehumanizing and it's so condescending. So like if someone says to me, oh, well, you must have high cholesterol, and I go, well, no, I don't actually. Then they're like, well, prove it. I shouldn't have to prove it.
Right.
Like I shouldn't have to call my doctor and give you my medical record. That's entitlement. But that's the thing, is thin and straight size people who engage in fat phobia are entitled because they experience a set of, they experience privilege in that they feel they should be able to ask for which is insane. You would never ask someone for their medical records, but that's basically what these people are doing. Prove to me that you're not, sick. But then on the other side of that, and this is something I've only really kind of recently understood, is it doesn't matter if someone's healthy. It doesn't matter. You still need to treat them with respect. You still need to treat them like a person. So like even the conversation I have with fat people who are like, well, I'm this and I'm that, I'm like, well, that doesn't mean jack shit. Because at the end of the day, we as fat people, if we say, well, I don't have high cholesterol, that's that fat person. That fat person is bad because they have high cholesterol. That's a whole other form of discrimination and a form of privilege right there. So we have to be careful when we go around justifying of like, oh, well, you know what, I can run a mile. But which is great, fabulous, love that for you. But if you can't run a mile, that doesn't make you less worthy than the person who can.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. And I think I'm wondering, like, from a female perspective, I see it as, there's obviously the ideal body type. And then if you deviate from that, it feels like it's only attractive if it's a certain type of plus size, if it's an hourglass plus size, or if the weight is distributed a certain way and it's plus size, then it's attractive. But all of the other types of bodies that are plus size aren't the ones that are beautiful and accepted. Do you feel any similarity to that?
I think there is some. I think women get hit hard, a lot harder with that than men do. I mean, yes and no, because men experience it. I will say the variations in men's body types when it comes to distribution of fat is far less, not extreme, but less varied than I think women's bodies do. I say that, but now I think of all these exceptions in my head. But again, I think men, even now, with the high standard of beauty that we put on men now, it's still not as high as the standard we put on women. Men still experience that male privilege. Even if you're a part of an oppressed group, you still experience male privilege. Or it's not only male, but people who pass as male as well also experience that. That privilege of, you are not held to the feminine body standard is up here and the male body standard is up here. They're both high, but women have it much harder than men do.
Do people ever comment to you either in person or online? Usually tends to be the worst comments are online because people are too scared to say it to your face.
Yeah,
but
especially when they know you'll fight back.
Right. So do you ever have people who ask why you don't just change, or who suggest that it's easy to just change and you should change?
Yeah, I think that it's yeah, I get those kind of comments. I got those comments when I was younger a lot.
So what is your reaction to that type of comment?
I punch them in the face. No. If it's online, I usually block them because this conversation is not productive. If I got a real life comment with them, I would sit down with them and try to, assuming it was someone who was open to explanation, of like, let me explain to you why it's not just like, because I think thin people think it's a numbers game, which it's really not. For some people it is, I suppose, but that assumes you have no other effects on your body than calories in versus calories out. And realistically, that's not how it is for most people. There are underlying issues, there are hormone stuff, there's financial things, there's class issues, because if you are not in a well-off area and you're in a food desert, you're not going to have access to high quality foods, which are going to be lower in calories. If you have hormone issues, your body may hang on to fat because it constantly think it's starving. Medical issues go beyond cholesterol and blood pressure. So I think that when people talk about, oh, just eat less, it's not that easy, because if it was, it wouldn't be like, if it was, because in my, not to share my personal dieting history, because I know stuff like MyFitnessPal can cause disordered eating in some people. I've been very lucky to have a very good relationship with counting calories, because it works for me. I don't recommend it to anybody who's like trepidatious about it. But they think it's just like put it in an app and, oh, I'm 400 calories under, good for today. And it's just not how it works. You know what I mean?
Right. And how do you feel about, like, I've noticed, I don't know how to feel about it, so I'm curious what you think. How do you feel about, like, very thin or healthy looking fit bodies sort of posting kind of like flexing and insinuating that they're promoting body positivity? Because I've noticed a lot of that on TikTok.
Yeah, it's a hard conversation to have, because those are the people who get pushed to the front of the body positive movement.
Right.
It's not for any, it's not because they have a particularly good message or they're very dedicated to body positivity. It's that they are aesthetically pleasing, and people, I don't like it. I wish more. It feels like everybody talking about body positivity is thin.
Right.
That gets put into mainstream media, and that's half the problem. This is something for anybody listening, body positivity is not for thin people. You are welcome to participate, but it is not for you. That's the message that I think is most important. Certainly it's a movement that we appreciate the support, just as, like, I participate in movements that are not about me, that's fine. But I am not going to center myself in a movement that is not about me.
Right.
That's the key. I think that if you want to post a photo flexing, I guess it's fine. And you want to hashtag it body positivity, I can't stop you. But I would prefer if you took a post from a plus size creator talking about body positivity and put it on your social media that has a larger reach than theirs. That's actually productive. I don't think it's bad that someone posts a photo flexing or like, look how skinny I am. Like, that's fine. I wish that's kind of neutral to me, but I think if you really wanted to help, you would raise the voices of plus size people, and specifically plus size people of color.
Do you think we're becoming any more inclusive as a society?
I do think there is movement in the right direction. I think it's small, tiny, microscopic steps. But I do think that there are steps forward. I think the fact we can like name a famous plus size actress from the 60s. Anyone? Exactly. And I think that, and even though providing examples of stuff like that is proving that it is an exception, not a rule, the fact that there even are exceptions is a step forward. I think that, and not even like not very well known, like, I mean, Rebel Wilson, because even like, she just lost some, but that's the thing, and that's the other thing that I think people have to remember about like Hollywood is, again, this is what I tell people you're not fat, you're just poor. Because once you have $6 million to your name and can take 6 weeks to all you do is diet and hire a dietitian and hire a chef to make all your foods, of course you can drop 60 pounds. Easy. Because you can afford to. You can afford not to go to work. You can afford to pay extravagant amounts of money to have people make the food for you. So I think, sorry, that was kind of a tangent. But I think we are making steps forward. I also think like a big part of what will help us move forward is plus size people standing up for themselves. Anybody who's listening to this, I am a huge advocate for if someone says something to you in public, make a scene. Get in their face, as long as you feel safe doing so. I have that privilege because I'm a 6'5" white guy. Get in their face and say, why did you do that? Because they don't have an answer. Because if you keep asking over and over and over and over, they will realize they don't have an answer. And they won't do it again because we have to create a situation where it's no longer societally acceptable to say shit like that in public. Because only when people aren't hearing it anymore will the next generation of people not say it anymore. I think that's a big, you have to change the public's mind.
Right. And how do you personally think when you already feel, I like how you worded it earlier, how you already feel like you have to justify why you exist, or you have to, if that barrier is already up for you, how do you overcome that and maintain a sense of confidence in yourself?
Therapy. I think, and I joke about that, but that is kind of what I believe, is that I think that fat people and plus size people, however you want to phrase it, are just stepped on and pushed down and degraded from the minute they are like a small child. You have to undo that programming. You have to. Because if you don't, you're not going to get anywhere. Because you have to basically deprogram yourself from hating yourself, and then you have to then program yourself to like yourself. Because I wasn't able to really get any sort of fitness work until I learned that I didn't hate myself. because every time I would think about working out, I would be scared that I'd be making an ass of myself. That's why shaming doesn't work. You know, I see one of the things I see on TikTok a lot, which makes me sick, is these fat people who are like playing for thin people's approval, where they're like, there's this one person on TikTok that every time I see a video of theirs, I'm just like, why do you feel the need to do this? And they're like crying on camera, going and like doing push-ups, and they're like, well, I might only be able to do one, but at least it's one more than I could do. And I'm just like, stop. Your fitness journey is not for them. Don't turn yourself into a spectacle for their approval. Do it because you love yourself and you want to be healthier. That's why, you know, I made a TikTok and I was like, if all you did was lose weight, that's not a glow up, because you are not better than you were 6 months ago. You've just changed some habits. If you want to say, I'm healthier now when I've learned better habits, fine. That's a glow up. But losing weight is not a glow up. And I feel very strongly about that torture porn of fat people losing weight is like not something that I will ever think is okay. And I am happy to call out the creators who make shit like that. Be proud of your journey if that's what you need to do, but don't make it this performative thing for thin people because you think you need their approval, because you don't, because you will never have their approval until you're thin. That's how it works. That's how fat phobia works. I got mad about that one.
Do you think that thinner people will ever admit that fatness is a fear of theirs?
Yes. Do you mean as a collective or individually? Because that might be two different answers.
Do you think, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think there are people sometimes who try to overcompensate and pretend that that is not a thought in their head, and will be overly accepting of the body positive community and very vocal about it, almost to the point where they're doing it to cover up the fact that if they themselves got fat, they would not love themselves. They would be mad about it.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is most thin people still have to go through the same deprogramming that fat people do. I think, because remember, like, this is a societal problem, it's a societal problem. That's why I talk about oppression. It's systematic oppression.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's systematic oppression in the same way that queer people experience systematic oppression, the same way that women experience systematic oppression. It's not an individual problem. Never has been, probably never will be. And I think that there are, like, oh God, I hit my microphone, sorry. I think there are people out there who have done the work. I think we all of us, and I do mean all of us, have gone through some sort of trauma that we have to work through, because that's the way that life is. Mm-hmm. And it's not a judgment on your parents or whoever raised you. It's because they're experiencing their own trauma. I think that, you know, I am a huge advocate for therapy for everybody, regardless if you think you need it or not. Like, if you're in college and you get free therapy, go. Mm-hmm. Because I think that there is, I think there are people who want to do the work. I have friends who, you know, I work in the musical theater industry and the performing industry, and there are people who genuinely want to do the work. And you can tell they want to do the work, but they don't know how. And I think that is where I think therapy comes in. I think there are people who want to be genuinely supportive. And when I think there are people who are scared of being fat and are unwilling to say it, I don't think it's out of maliciousness or malice, I should say. It's that they don't know how to deprogram themselves. They know because I think at that point someone's aware enough that they know that they need to be deprogrammed. I feel like I'm talking about like a sci-fi novel. We must deprogram them. They need to be deprogrammed from expectations of what society dictates, but they're not sure how to go about it or where even to start. That's the most overwhelming. That is the most overwhelming feeling in the world, of knowing I have this problem and I need to get to, I am at point A and I have to get to point Z. How do I get there? That is the most, I think that's the hardest part. I think that's just the hardest part of dealing with stuff that's been ingrained into you. I mean, I had to go through it myself when I was, not only with my fatness, but also, I'm going to go ahead and call myself out. Like, I had some racial hangups when I moved to New York, because I grew up in a predominantly Caucasian neighborhood, in a Caucasian school, in a Caucasian state. I'm from Maine. And I had issues that I had to get over real quick. And I had to examine my issues, and I had to take responsibility for what I was thinking and feeling, and say, okay, great, why do I feel this way? That self-reflection and learning where to start with that kind of process is truly, I think, one of the hardest things we can do as human beings. So I think that I do believe that there are people who want to do the work. And I think that there are people who, and I think it is our, I think you can, I'm not to say our responsibility, because I don't think the onus should be on us to like fix fat phobia, but it is kind of on us to call out our friends and be like, hey, I know you're trying to be supportive, but like, this is how it's coming across. Is this how you're feeling? Let's talk about it a little bit. And I don't think that's a situation where you're dealing with an aggressor necessarily, but that's someone who's like trying to understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, don't stress yourself out. Don't put yourself at risk for somebody else, because you can't heal anybody if you're not healthy.
Right. And I think it's so great that you speak out like this, because I think sometimes people that get really offended by certain comments, mm-hmm. There's a reason that you're getting so offended by it. And I'm not talking about people being rude to you and bullying you and you getting offended. Obviously, if someone's bullying you, you're offended. But I mean, somebody saying this is fat phobia, and the people that jump to defend the fact that it's not usually don't want to admit that it's something that's going through, like it is. Mm-hmm. Of course, you don't want to sound ignorant. You don't want to sound like you're, oppressing someone, or you think negatively of someone for their body. But I think it's really important that you're speaking out and saying, hey, you are thinking negatively of me because of my body, and this is why. And it's not just you individually toward me individually. Mm-hmm. It's everybody toward mm-hmm. this group.
Correct. I think that, so my response is twofold to that. One, don't bother fighting on the internet, which that's kind of my philosophy with it, because don't get me wrong, it is very tempting to get in the comments and get into a scrape. God knows I'm currently banned from Facebook for calling out a homophobe, and I called her an ignorant, arrogant bitch. And somehow that was against their, terms and policies. So don't get me wrong. I totally fall for, I have a temper, easily goaded into a fight. That being said, from a third-party perspective, I do tell people, I'm like, the internet, here's the thing about internet comments. If you feel the need to engage with a comment, and this is kind of an advice to anybody who's on TikTok who gets shamed or attacked or insulted, if you are going to engage with a comment, make it a video, because chances are you're probably not going to change the person who you're responding to's mind. But those conflicts can influence the people who watch them. That's who you're really getting at. That's like when my mother always tells me, pick your battles. And I'll pick battles with friends and family who are usually a transgender issue, or some sort of homophobia or transphobia issue. And they're like, why are you fighting about this so hard? And I'm like, I'm not fighting to change their mind. What I'm doing is I'm fighting so that their granddaughter, who is going to change her name to Kyle in 4 years, knows that there are people out there fighting for them. That's why I do such a public display, because they need to know that there's going to be someone who is going to stand up for them. It's not about changing someone's. It's not always about changing the person you're directly engaging with's mind. although if you do, like, it's a happy side effect. And I've done it. Um, not that I'm bragging, but I argued with someone on the internet successfully. No, but it has a lot more to do with who's watching what you're doing than the person you're engaging with. That was long.
No, it makes total sense. I think it's just interesting to see that, I think it's strange how people will take things that exist and be against it instead of, like, there's people, gay people exist, fat people exist, black people exist. It's a thing. Like, it is going to exist. So
nothing you do is going to change it.
Right. So why are you choosing to tear those people down when no matter what you do, I'm sorry, but it's still there? You're not going to solve obesity by fat shaming someone.
No, and I think that, I genuinely, there are people out there who are like, well, I got shamed and that I did it. And I'm like, yeah, but are you going to keep the weight off long term? Or do you now have an eating disorder because of it and you just don't want anybody to know because you're on social media?
Right.
And I think that we have a complicated relationship with disordered eating too. I think that not a lot of people want to talk about, because I think we're all kind of like, we have normalized, that's not the word I'm looking for, but we've kind of mainstreamed certain eating disorders and like what that eating disorder looks like. And, it's like okay. So when I was in middle school and high school, I engaged in disordered eating. I would not say I had an eating disorder. That's just my life falling apart. It's fine. I engaged in disordered eating in high school, and I would not say that I had an eating disorder, but it was, I think a lot more people engage in disordered eating than we like to talk about. And it's everyone. I think everybody, like, I did things in high school when I said it to my therapist, she was like, what? I think that there's a lot more that I think that society's relationship with food is very toxic, and there needs to be a change in conversation with how we treat, how medical professionals treat the discussion of diet, and diet meaning what you consume, not like Atkins. I think that's a huge, because I think people have this very kind of, well, my doctor told me it was bad, so it's bad. And I'm like, just like any industry, there are going to be differing opinions, and some people are going to be bad. Not to like to put too blunt a point on it, but I think that's the way that we talk about diet needs to change, because I think that that's a lot of what causes problems. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So if somebody were to objectively, a stranger off the street were to take a look at you, what do you think they would see, and then who would you like them to see you as? How does that differ from who you actually are?
I mean, I go out of a lot of this comes into like how you present yourself to the world. I mean, if assuming I was walking down the street in a very new, like, let's say a gray sweatsuit, gray sweatshirt, gray sweatpants, white sneakers, they would probably see someone who is probably sweaty, kind of gross and icky, maybe like eats a lot, like kind of a downer, kind of depressed, because that's what's expected. I would like them just to see neutrality, because at the end of the day, that's all we want from anybody. I think that, because like assuming if we're like, like a dystopian novel and everybody wears the same thing and everybody has the same haircut, you do hope that people start with a base expectation of just, I don't need anything special, I just want to be treated like a person. I don't, I think, and I that's kind of that in and of itself is kind of problematic, because like that will never happen and that will never be a thing that is possible because of a million different situations. But I think for me, the bare minimum would be just someone like me, like just someone just trying to live their life, be successful, be happy, find somebody to love, because that's all, like that's all anybody wants is to be fulfilled. It's regardless of where you come from, regardless of where you work, regardless of um, what you do. It's all just, you want to be happy and you want to be comfortable. I think that's kind of what I would hope people would see from me in an ideal world.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me. I think I really admire the way that you're speaking out, and I thank you so much for taking the time to educate me, because I think it's important. Just because you're not part of a certain group doesn't mean you can ignore all of the problems that they have. So I think.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've had a wonderful time, and I appreciate the opportunity that you're giving us a platform.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, and
Thank you.
keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your new year.
You too.
All right.
All right. Stay in touch.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.